What kind of person checks another man's door every night? Not to keep him safe, but to see what they can take. That's the question I ask myself now. But back then it felt almost harmless. The first night Marion and I crept across the yard, it wasn't about ghosts or curses or even the stories that clung to that house. It was about temptation. The Wards had just moved in, young, hopeful, and naive. They locked up, sure, but never well enough. And I knew it. I told Marion, just the door, just the window. If it's open, we take what's easy. If it's locked, we leave. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the dark shape of the house. But she followed anyway. She always did. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we crossed over. The house loomed, silent, watching. And when my hand closed around the back doorknob, slick with cold night air, it turned. Unlocked. Marion's breath caught, sharp as a knife in her throat. She whispered, "Graham, don't." But I already had. How far would you go for something that isn't yours? The moment that door gave way beneath my hand, something inside me shifted. I'd expected resistance, the safety of a lock, the excuse to turn back. But the knob turned smooth, like it had been waiting for me. I pushed. Just a crack. The hinges groaned. A sound so sharp in the silence. Marion flinched as though it had cut her skin. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and stale secrets. The Wards hadn't settled yet. Boxes stacked in corners, furniture half unpacked, a life half claimed. It made me bold. I reached for the first thing I saw, a small brass clock sitting on the counter. Nothing special, but the weight of it in my hand sent a rush through me, like proof the world wasn't so tightly locked after all. Marion grabbed my arm, her voice a hiss. "Put it back, Graham. Please. They'll notice." I looked at her, the worry creasing her face, the way her eyes darted to every shadow. She was terrified, but beneath that fear, I saw it, the spark of something else. Curiosity. Hunger. I didn't put the clock back. I slipped it into my coat pocket, and the sound of the metal scraping fabric echoed louder than thunder in my ears. We should have left then. We should have. But greed is never satisfied. I moved deeper past the boxes into the living room, and that's when I saw it, a photograph lying face down on the floor, a black and white portrait in a cracked frame. Not Ethan. Not Sophie. Someone else. Family I didn't recognize. Their eyes, frozen in time, stared right through the glass. Marion's hand tightened around mine. "This isn't theirs," she whispered. No, it wasn't. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing down, suffocating. I felt it, that wrongness, that pull. The house wasn't resisting us. It was offering itself up, and we were taking. What happens when you steal something you can't return? The photograph haunted me. I carried it out that night like a prize, though Marion begged me to leave it. It wasn't even valuable. The glass cracked, the wood splintered. But those eyes, the way they looked at me as if they knew me, as if they were waiting for me. We got home before midnight. Marion wouldn't speak to me. She went straight upstairs, but I stayed in the kitchen, staring at that photo under the yellow light. The faces belonged to strangers, but the longer I stared, the less strange they felt. A man, a woman, 2 children, all dressed like they'd lived half a century ago. And their smiles weren't real. I shoved it in a drawer, but even then I swore I could feel them watching. The next night, Marion refused to come. She sat on the bed, arms folded tight, saying she was done. "It's not just stealing anymore, Graham. That house, it doesn't want us there." I laughed at her, dismissed it, but deep down I felt it too. The house hadn't resisted me. It had opened itself, and part of me wondered what else might it give. So I went alone. Crossing the yard felt different without Marion's hand in mine. The air seemed thicker, the shadows darker. My chest thudded with a nervous thrill I hadn't felt since I was young. I reached the door again. This time it was locked. I almost turned back. Almost. But when I tried the kitchen window, the one over the sink, it slid up without a sound. I froze. Inside, the curtains billowed, though no wind touched my face. The house exhaled warm air into the night, and for the first time, it felt alive. I climbed in. The living room was different. The boxes were gone. The couch was gone. The wards had only just moved in. But their things weren't there anymore. The room looked exactly as it had in the photograph. I staggered back, breath shallow, heart hammering. My fingers brushed against the drawer in the old wooden cabinet, and it creaked open as if nudged by invisible hands. Inside, folded neatly, was another photograph. This time, it was me, Marion, our faces, frozen in black and white, smiling those same hollow smiles. They thought the real danger was the house, until a stranger pressed his face against the glass. Her name was Lila Green, a young mother who had just moved 2 streets away. She wasn't supposed to be part of the story. She didn't even know the wards. But on that storm-torn night, she became the only witness to something no one else dared to admit. The rain was relentless, drumming against her small car as she parked near the corner. She was only trying to escape her own house, her husband's anger, his words that cut sharper than knives. She thought driving would calm her. But when she slowed near the abandoned home, she saw it. A shadow at the window, a man's silhouette, standing unnaturally still, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Her first thought was simple, squatters. Her second thought was darker. What if he's watching someone inside? And then, she realized, there wasn't supposed to be anyone inside. Lila gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. A voice in her head begged her to drive away. But another voice, the one that had been silenced too many times by her husband, whispered, "If you leave, someone could die tonight." So she stayed, watching, trembling, waiting for proof she wasn't losing her mind. The man at the window suddenly moved, not toward the glass, but toward the door. His hand pressed against the wood. Not a knock, not even a break-in. It was stranger, like he was testing it. And then the door opened. No resistance, no key, no sound. Just a slow, deliberate creak that made her heart pound against her ribs. Someone had been inside all along. Lila's body froze, but her mind raced. She thought of calling the police, but her phone was dead. She thought of honking the horn, but what if he saw her? She thought of running home, but what if she never got another chance to stop this? She had spent years being the woman who stayed quiet, who looked away. Tonight, in that storm, she refused to be invisible. So she did something reckless, something that would change her life. She stepped out of the car. Her shoes sank into the mud as the rain plastered her hair to her face. The man didn't see her yet. She whispered to herself, a promise that sounded more like a prayer. "Not tonight. I won't let you hurt them tonight." But when she reached the porch, lightning split the sky, and for the first time the man turned. His eyes locked on hers, and he smiled. They always said the house would only show you what you feared most. But that night it showed something no one could explain. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the silence cracked. Not from inside the house, but from the garden. A laugh, low, careful, almost tender. It wasn't Marion's. It wasn't Lila's. It belonged to a man no one in town had ever claimed to know. His name was Jonas Hale, a traveling glassmaker, or so he called himself when the police once stopped him outside Hollow Creek. He carried no tools, no cart, no proof of his craft. Only a suitcase filled with shards of colored glass, each piece sharp enough to cut through bone. That night, Jonas stood at the window with that suitcase open by his feet. And what made the women freeze wasn't just his smile. It was that every piece of glass reflected not their faces, but the face of Graham Ward, pale, drained, and still alive. "Did you think the house buried him?" Jonas whispered, his voice curling like smoke into the cracked panes. "No. The house doesn't bury. It keeps." Lila's throat locked. Marion shook her head violently, as if the words themselves might pierce her skull. But Jonas didn't stop. He lifted one shard, the red one, and held it to the moonlight. And through that sliver of crimson glass, they saw something moving inside the house. Not a shadow, not a ghost. Something with Graham's eyes but Jonas's smile. That was the twist. The house hadn't just taken Graham, it had traded him. and Jonas Hale was the proof. He pressed his palm against the window, blood smearing where the glass cut him, and hissed, "Every deal has its mirror." He gave himself for wealth. Now someone else must pay to balance the glass. The wind screamed, slamming the shutters open so violently the women staggered back. And for a split second, they saw the inside of the house not as rooms, but as a hall of mirrors, endless corridors of faces, each one trapped in reflection, each one smiling. Jonas Hale was not offering them mercy. He was offering them a choice. One of them would have to step inside, or Graham Ward would never stop knocking from the other side of the mirror. Ethan sat awake long after Sophie's breathing had steadied beside him. The old house creaked and groaned, but this was different. It was as though the walls themselves exhaled, slow and deliberate, like lungs pulling in air. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But then came the smell, sharp, metallic, undeniable. Blood. He rose, trembling, following the scent down the narrow hallway. The floorboards seemed to guide him, groaning under his every step. And then he saw it, an unfamiliar door that hadn't been there before. His pulse roared in his ears. "No, I know this hallway. There are only 3 doors. Always 3. But now, there were 4. The new door was painted the color of ash, and its handle was ice cold to the touch. His hand shook as he reached for it, but something stopped him. Not Sophie's voice, not reason. Something deeper, like his own soul screaming, "Don't open it." Still, he pushed. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. Inside, the room was suffocatingly small, lit by a single dangling bulb. And there, etched into the plaster walls with what looked like fingernails, were names. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one carved deep, letters jagged and frantic. At the very bottom of the wall, fresher than the rest, Ethan froze when he read the last 2. Ethan Ward. Sophie Ward. His knees gave out. His breath hitched like he was drowning. The bulb above him flickered, and in the brief, stuttering light, the truth hit him. Some of the older names were crossed out, not erased, claimed, and beside him, scratched faintly into the floorboards, was a single message. "You are not the first. You will not be the last." The storm had passed, but the town was quieter than ever. Every house on Willow Lane had curtains drawn, doors locked, and lights turned off earlier than usual. Fear had taken root in the soil itself. But then a letter appeared. It wasn't slipped under a door. It wasn't sent through the mail. It was nailed with a single rusty nail to the wooden post of the town's bulletin board. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, almost trembling. "You think you've seen the whole story. You think you know who the monster is. But you've been looking in the wrong direction. Look closer at the names you trust most. Look closer at the one who cries the loudest." The town gathered around the board, whispers rising like smoke. The note wasn't signed, but below the writing, faint and smeared with what looked like ash, was the shape of a handprint. Not a bloody one, not a painted one, a burnt one, as if whoever pressed it there was reaching from a fire. Ethan Ward was the first to step forward. He pressed his trembling hand against it. It didn't fit. Neither did Sophie's. Neither did anyone in the crowd. The hand belonged to someone else. Someone they hadn't suspected. Someone they didn't want to believe could ever exist among them. And then, almost as if answering the town's horror, the church bells rang. But the church had been locked for weeks. No one should have been inside. The crowd ran. Doors slammed. Footsteps echoed. Panic spread. By the time they reached the church, the doors stood wide open. On the altar lay another note. This one shorter, sharper, more final. The truth was never buried. You walked past it every day. The graves you prayed over weren't graves at all. Look beneath. You'll see. Sophie gasped, clutching Ethan's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. The town looked to the cemetery, the place they had all avoided since the first disappearance. The graves weren't graves. One by one, lanterns lit. Shovels were taken. Hands dug into the wet earth. And when the soil gave way, What lay beneath wasn't a body. It wasn't bones. It was a box. Inside the box were photographs. Hundreds of them. Children. Families. The missing. Each face smiling, frozen in time. And on the back of every photo, in that same jagged handwriting, was the same chilling sentence. I only took what you refused to see. The screams that night were not from what was found, but from the realization that the monster wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had stood among them, blending in perfectly, hiding in plain sight. Not behind a mask, but behind trust. And as the town broke into chaos, as the graves revealed more boxes, as the bells rang once more without a hand to pull the rope, Sophie whispered through her tears, "We never had a ghost among us. We had a neighbor." And that's where the story ends. Not with answers, but with a question no one dares to ask out loud. How do you ever trust a neighbor again? Subscribe to the Veil of Secret, where every ending hides a darker beginning.